We begin with the Fox News Alert, and we're going to take you to Berlin in a moment, where we're awaiting President Obama and the German Chancellor as well to hold a joint news conference as Mr. Obama stresses to European leaders that the U.S. will continue its commitment to NATO in a Trump administration. Welcome to Happening Now, everybody. I'm Jenna Lee.
And I'm John Scott. Germany is the main stop on the final overseas trip of the Obama presidency. Europe's leading economy is an important U.S. trading partner, as well as a key NATO member, and the host to thousands of U.S. troops on the ground there. So as President Obama tries to assure the global community about the new American political landscape, an editorial in the Wall Street Journal caught our eye. In a piece called The New Trump Democrats, Dan Henninger writes, quote, "Even by the normal standards of post-election schadenfreude, it's hard not to be agog at the spectacle of Democrats trying to figure out what hit them and what to do about it." Let's bring in Dan Henninger, deputy editorial page editor for the Wall Street Journal. I'm not sure if you were able to hear Nancy Pelosi's news conference just a moment ago, but she was saying, you know, technology is important and we have to build an economy that lifts up all of the American people. You suggest that that is something that Democrats have kind of lost the ability to do over the years.
Yeah, I think so, John. I mean, I believe that the Democrats don't even recognize the real economy out there anymore. And, of course, the pretext for all this is the postmortems after the election, in which the Democrats have decided they've got to do something to reach out to the Trump voters. And that would be the blue-collar white workers out there in places like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio, who they lost. I mean, think about that a little bit. These are the people who basically have voted Democratic from the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt through Bill Clinton. So how did the Democratic Party manage to lose a constituency that had voted with them for nearly 80 years? And I think the reason is that this generation of Democrats, which is basically completely focused on redistribution of the federal budget, has lost connection completely with the private economy and the way the private economy works.
I want to share with viewers a line from your piece that I thought was pretty pointed. You say, for the Democrats, America's daily life of work, profit, and loss across 50 states is essentially an alien phenomenon that sends them revenue, the way a pipeline transmits natural gas. This pipeline fuels their economy, which is the thousands and thousands of spending and line items in the $4 trillion federal budget. Some would call this redistribution. Democrats would call it their life's work. You really think they've lost complete touch with how the economy works and how Americans earn their paychecks?
Yes, I really do, John. I mean, they have not, all of the regulations that were passed during the Obama era, Dodd-Frank, trying to put the coal industry out of work, they have the idea that they can suppress the private sector, and then if the money, taxation, is transmitted as through gas pipelines back to Washington, as Nancy Pelosi said, we'll redistribute it in a way that it works for everyone. That's their idea of economic fairness. And this is this ideology that has grown up on the East Coast and the West Coast. And now everybody in between, including Democrats, is upset that they have been taken down the garden path by the liberals on the West and East Coast. And now Nancy Pelosi is facing a challenge for her leadership from two Ohio Democrats, Marcy Kaptur and Representative Tim Ryan, who said it has been too long. The Democratic Party has basically been flying over our region. And it is hilarious to me, John, that the press is now out there trying to rediscover the Trump voters as though they're the biggest archaeological dig in journalism. Where have these people been? And I think it's going to be a big uphill lift for the Democrats to reconnect to the way people actually live their lives and work out there in the real economy.
It was a great column in the Wall Street Journal, and our viewers might want to check it out. Once again, to give us some take on this transition that is about to take place. He, of course, is deputy editorial page editor for the Wall Street Journal. What's your overall assessment of the people that Donald Trump has been calling in for meetings, Daniel?
Oh, well, this list that Doug just read to us, I think, is very, very positive. These are three of the strongest Republican congressmen in the House: Tom Price, Mike Pompeo, and especially Jeb Hensarling. Hensarling has been head of the Finance Committee in the House, And of all the names that I have seen floated out there for the Treasury Secretary, the best that I saw was indeed Jeb Hensarling. I'll tell you something, John. If he appointed Jeb Hensarling Secretary of Treasury, you could put the growth of the economy in the bank. He's that good. So it sounds, and then I heard that last night Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society was coming in to talk to him about Supreme Court picks. Some of these are excellent people now that Trump is talking to. And look, this transition has been a work in progress, like everything else about this campaign and this president-elect's post-election period. But I think we've got to give them time, stand back a little bit, and let it unfold until there's some real names on the table that we can talk about. But those guys, they're strong. This looks very positive to me.
Touching on what we spoke about earlier, Democrats, ironically, two of the most liberal Democrats, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders in the U.S. Senate, are both saying they can work with Donald Trump. They can work with this administration. Do you really see that happening?
Well, there is a footnote to that. Nancy Pelosi said the same thing. And the footnote is they can work with Donald Trump if he becomes a progressive Democrat, essentially. I mean, Elizabeth Warren also said that if he tries to cut taxes, they're basically giveaways to corporations, then she will fight him tooth and nail. And the Democrats, the left-wing Democrats in the Senate, are determined to obstruct Donald Trump unless he does business with them. And I think the only common ground they really have is infrastructure spending. But the question for those Democrats that are up for re-election in 2 years, centrists like Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, is do they want to go down that rabbit hole with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders? I think they're probably going to want to talk to Donald Trump, and I suspect that their new minority leader, Chuck Schumer of New York, is the kind of guy who would be happy to at least sit down with Trump and talk about something like cutting the corporate tax rate.
And worth pointing out that the phenomenon that occurred this year, where Republicans were defending something like 24 Senate seats and Democrats were defending 10, that reverses next time around. There are going to be an awful lot of Democrats defending Senate seats.
They've got 25 seats up, and 10 of them are in states that Donald Trump won. So they are at risk. And I think that, the kind of people that Trump is bringing in, as I was just mentioning, Tom Price and Jeb Hensarling, they know how to work with Democrats. Hensarling, if he were in, as I say, Secretary of Treasury, he would be able to work with people like Chuck Schumer. I think the one thing about what's going on now is that politics is returning to Washington. And during the 8 years of Obama's presidency, it has basically been a political desert because Barack Obama really didn't do retail politics. But I think you're going to see a lot more give and take than we have the past 8 years between the Trump presidency and the Schumer Democrats.
It's going to be fascinating to watch.
It's going to be fun.
Hope you'll watch it with us. Daniel Henninger, Wall Street Journal. Thanks.
For columnists, there's a lot to take in these days, a lot to write about.
A lot of rich material out there.
Well, Vice President-elect Mike Pence is on Capitol Hill today for meetings with congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle. This on top of his busy schedule as head of Mr. Trump's transition team. And now, after what can only be described as an unconventional election season, what kind of vice president will Mike Pence be? Shannon Bream is live in Washington taking a look at this for us. Shannon?
Hi, Jenna. Well, today, Pence says he is looking forward to working with lawmakers on Capitol Hill, where you'll remember he once served as a member of the House. We caught up with him on the Hill just moments ago.
Very humbling to be back among my former colleagues. We're excited about moving the Trump agenda forward in the coming Congress, and I'm just so grateful.
He is already very hands-on, as we've been seeing through his role with the transition team, meaning he is leading the charge to put together cabinet possibilities and other top Trump administration key players. For many, the Trump-Pence pairing was a jarring contrast in their two backgrounds and demeanors, but we know it worked well on the campaign trail. Lee Edwards of the Heritage Foundation says Pence's introduction to America during the vice presidential debate illustrates how he will help to govern.
Knows the issues, is able to articulate them without going on and on and on. So I think all in all, he showed us, and showed the American people, just what kind of vice president. And clearly, Mr. Trump liked what he saw very much and gave him increasing, and is now giving him really extensive authority with the transition.
The power of the vice presidential role has grown steadily in recent decades, from LBJ, who analysts say really didn't start out having much power under President Kennedy, primarily attending funerals and other diplomatic events, to Dick Cheney, who was actually criticized, as we know, many times as being too much of a voice in the Bush 43 administration. As for Pence, he comes in as one of the most politically experienced vice presidents some say we've ever had. A former congressman, where he wound up in a leadership role, now serving as a governor. And he's got a pretty unique resume in that it also includes a law degree and a stint as a radio talk show host. We understand Trump will lean on him heavily as a bridge to Capitol Hill, which he'll need to do to get his agenda moving. Jenna.
We'll be watching. Shannon, thank you.
She was murdered months ago. Now the big development in the case of a New York City woman who was killed after going jogging near her mother's home in Massachusetts. What was spotted in the area right before her murder? Plus the battle to retake the last major ISIS stronghold in Iraq. Why special forces just paused in their fight for Mosul. We're live with that story.
Could you change your prediction in the next 5 days, or is it pretty much set?
I am not going to change my prediction. I've given my qualification for the first time ever. I'm not like some of these Republican congressmen going to flip and flip-flop back. No way.
And it's fascinating. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. So, Professor, we'll talk to you in just a few days. Thank you so much.
Just don't skewer me if I'm wrong.
I would never do that. You know that, right? Professor Alan Lichtman, just days before the election, predicting a Donald Trump win. He actually called it several months earlier. And Professor Lichtman has gotten it right in every presidential election since 1984 using a special set of keys. Joining me once again, as promised, Alan Lichtman, distinguished professor of history at American University in Washington, D.C. Professor, congratulations. Your qualifications, there were no need. What do you think of the results?
Well, you know, I feel vindicated in this sense that I demonstrated that to understand elections, you've got to look at the deeper forces that drive the outcomes. My system doesn't look at polls. It forgets the pundits. It doesn't look at the day-to-day events of campaigns. It looks at the patterns of history, indicating that elections are primarily judgments on the strength and performance of the party holding the White House. And as we discussed, my system revealed the vulnerabilities of the incumbent Democrats, despite all of the issues with Donald Trump and the Donald Trump campaign. I'm also very pleased to see the polls get a comeuppance. Not the pollsters, but the polls. Polls are not predictors. They are abused and misused as predictors. They're snapshots at a given point in time, and you don't know where they're going to stand at another point. In addition, they all have to screen for likely voters, and they don't know who is actually going to vote. So when they say the error margin is plus and minus 3.5%, that assumes everything else is right, including the likely voter screen. So the real error may be much larger. And by the way, analysts of polls like Nate Silver, they're no better, because whatever they say is simply based on the polls themselves and nothing more. Nate Silver is a clerk. He just compiles polls.
Uh-oh. And we're going to have to invite him on to respond to that. In the meantime, you're speaking my language, because as our team knows, I'm not a huge fan of polls, and that bothers some people at times. You know, one of the themes that we've explored this election, in this post-election period, is changing demographics and regionalism. And what I find so interesting about your work is that that doesn't really pertain to the 13 different points directly. And I was wondering, of the 13 points that you look at, true or false questions, what do you think emerges as the most important? Is there a most important question that applied more this time around? Are they all equally important, or did you see a certain tipping point during your work that really indicated a Trump win?
Jenna, I'm going to part the curtain and reveal the secrets of the magician. The secret is that all my keys are equally weighted. When you look at other prediction systems, they have multipliers on their factors. The problem is the multiplier changes unpredictably every 4 years. I don't have to worry about multipliers. All we have to do is count to 6. And the two keys that really stood out for me this year, though, even though they're all equally weighted, is number one, the lack of a real policy accomplishment in the Obama second term, comparable to the Affordable Care Act in the first term. In a sense, and this is very ironic, Republican obstructionism worked. And secondly, the lack of a major foreign policy accomplishment comparable to the dispatch of bin Laden. You know, if Obama had started the invasion of Mosul a little bit earlier, maybe he would have completed it before the election and had a big victory for the Democrats to run on.
What do you think either party could learn from your system about how to better campaign and have more success?
They would have to completely change the way they campaign if they want to listen to me. Number one, get rid of all the negative ads. I mean all of them. They don't work. They have never, ever turned an election. And instead of spending your money on these useless, offensive, negative ads, focus on building a mandate for governing. Tell the American people exactly what you stand for, what your big theme is, and what you are going to do as president. The American people yearn for that, and they almost never get it. That would build a mandate for governing, so once you're in office, you could achieve the accomplishments that would win you keys to get you to be reelected. The way we campaign now doesn't really build a basis for governing.
Interesting.
Very well.
Make America Great Again, though, seems to fit some of that, what you're talking about. You don't have any sort of questions like this for the lottery or for the Super Bowl or anything. I mean, I was just curious if there's...
Jenna, I have been approached by gamblers to have keys to horse races, and I've turned them all down because I don't want to wind up with cement overshoes.
Good. I think that's a wise decision, and we enjoy talking to you about politics, so we'd like
Always,
to keep that.
Jenna.
Professor, thank you very much. Great to have you back on the program.
Right now, some crime stories. We're following new developments in a murder mystery out of Massachusetts. That's where a New York City woman was when she was killed when she went jogging near her mother's home over the summer. Now, investigators say a dark-colored SUV was seen parked in the area at the time she was murdered. Police now questioning two people in the disappearance of a Connecticut man after a body was found in a shallow grave in New Jersey. Joey Cominali was seen entering a luxury apartment building in Manhattan on Sunday. Police sources say they believe he was stabbed to death at a party there after finding evidence of foul play. A key ruling in the case of a South Carolina man about to go on trial for the murder of 9 worshipers at a Charleston church last year. The judge deciding that Dylann Roof's competency hearing will not be public, saying Roof's right to a fair and impartial trial would be tainted if the hearing were open. Breaking now in the battle to defeat ISIS in Iraq, with Iraqi special forces pausing their push into the Islamic State's last major stronghold in that country, Mosul, as the terror group launches deadly attacks on civilians and troops. But there is progress. Iraq's Shia militia says it is on the verge of driving ISIS from an airbase just west of Mosul. Greg Palcott, live in Erbil, Iraq. Greg.
John, you are right. Iraqi forces say that they are pausing today. Unfortunately, ISIS did not pause to deadly effect. The latest reports we are getting from the eastern side of that city is that an ISIS car bomber and a sniper left several Iraqi soldiers and civilians dead, and others were injured. There are new reports also of mass graves found to the south of Mosul, 200 said to be executed by ISIS. All of this fighting is pushing many residents of Mosul to flee and pushing others to help the refugees. Take a look at what we saw today.
Each of these stacks represents 30 days worth of rations for a family of 5. The folks here show their identification, come over here, pick up the sacks of wheat and flour, and then take them back to their tents at this sprawling refugee camp. Basics, just to get by.
This aid is being distributed by the North Carolina-based Samaritan's Purse charity. They've been active for years in this region, which, by the way, has seen a lot of displaced Christians as well as Muslims. We talked to one staffer of the charity out of that camp. He feels like the charity is making a real difference. We also spoke with a refugee from Mosul, 42-year-old father of 5, Ali Mohammed. He helped personalize the story for me. He said he and his family lived like prisoners under ISIS for over 2 years. He was arrested twice and whipped by the militants. His crime? Smoking. It's forbidden under ISIS. He, like many others, fled at the height of the battle last week between ISIS and Iraqi soldiers in his neighborhood. Car bombs going off, rockets going off. He said it was very dangerous. He's happy now to be in a safe place. And one more thing, John, at least he and others there have a little bit of a light at the end of this very dark tunnel. They do believe that ISIS will eventually be driven from Mosul and they can get back to their home, their city. It's going to take a while, though.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Let's hope sooner than later. Greg Palcott live in Erbil, Iraq. Thank you, Greg.
Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will be the first foreign leader to sit down with Mr. Trump as the president-elect begins the groundwork for his foreign policy. In the meantime, Vice President-elect Mike Pence is focusing on domestic issues. He's meeting with congressional leaders on Capitol Hill, including Speaker Paul Ryan, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, and the newly elected Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Our chief congressional correspondent Mike Emanuel is live from Capitol Hill with more. Mike?
Jenna, good afternoon to you. A bit of a homecoming for Vice President-elect Mike Pence back here on Capitol Hill for a series of meetings this afternoon, including one this hour with House Speaker Paul Ryan. Pence started his day on the Hill meeting with Ryan and House Republicans. He served with them for 12 years as a member of Congress from Indiana. And Pence, after the meeting, thanked his former colleagues for the hospitality he received.
Very humbling to be back among my former colleagues. We're excited about moving the Trump agenda forward in the coming Congress, and I'm just so grateful.
Pence left Capitol Hill for a short period of time to go to the transition headquarters here in Washington. He met with the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and after that meeting, I asked Senator Bob Corker if he was there for a job interview.
Does Secretary of State Corker have a nice ring to it?
Well, again, the president-elect is going to have, all kinds of choices in that regard, and for anybody to have the privilege of, pursuing our national interest around the world would be a great honor. But I got to believe there's a whole lot of people that would like the ring of that with their names.
Pence is also due to meet with top Democrats here on Capitol Hill. Chuck Schumer is going to be the Senate Minority Leader in the new Congress. He's also due to sit down with Nancy Pelosi, with whom he served for 12 years. And so that meeting is also on his agenda. We are in Statuary Hall on the second floor of the United States Capitol building, and we are waiting to see if we might get a shot of the Vice President-elect going from meeting to meeting. Jenna?
Yeah, you can, Mike. We were wondering who those guys were behind you. Best of luck.
Absolutely.
We look forward to that sound coming in. Thank you, Mike.
As we begin to get a clearer picture of what a Trump administration might look like, there is growing speculation about a future role for Mr. Trump's son-in-law. Jared Kushner, who is married to Mr. Trump's daughter Ivanka, is said to be one of his most trusted advisors. Here to talk about it is Chris Wallace, anchor of Fox News Sunday. There are some who thought Jared Kushner might even become chief of staff. That's clearly not going to happen. Since he's already put Reince Priebus in that role. But what about the relationship between these two men? What does Jared Kushner bring to Donald Trump's White House?
Well, I don't know if he's going to be in the White House, but he certainly brings a level of advice and counsel that Donald Trump very much valued during the campaign, John. He was one of the top and closest advisors to Trump throughout the campaign, and you sure get the impression that he's playing a big role in the transition, and whether in a formal or informal sense, he'll be a top advisor to him as president. In terms of giving him a job, they run up against the nepotism law that was put into effect after Jack Kennedy picked Bobby Kennedy as his attorney general back in 1960. Now, there's some question as to whether that's constitutional, whether you can limit a chief executive's choice of who he wants to have surrounding him in his administration. But whether it's a formal role or an informal role, clearly Jared Kushner is going to play a big role in the Trump years.
What was his role in the campaign? We heard that he held a great deal of power, but he keeps that pretty close to the vest, doesn't he?
Yeah, it was very much behind the scenes. I'm told that in a lot of the key decisions that were being made, he played a kind of role as almost a campaign manager. Obviously, he wasn't going out like the official campaign manager Kellyanne Conway was and talking to the media, but I'm told that he was one of the last and most important voices that Donald Trump would seek before he made any key decision, and that he was very involved in the structure and the organization and the strategy of the campaign. And I think that's exactly the role he's playing in the transition. It's particularly interesting because Kushner is said to have been one of the key figures in ousting Chris Christie as the chief of the transition and installing Mike Pence. Christie and Kushner's family do not get along very well.
Yeah.
In fact, Christie prosecuted and put Kushner's father in jail several years ago, and apparently the grudge has remained.
18 felony counts, apparently. And is that the reason? Because a lot of people were mystified as to why Chris Christie was suddenly well, he was taken off of the transition team. Is that the reason?
Well, that was one of the reasons. I think another one of the reasons is because of Bridgegate and the fact that in the week before the election, 2 of Chris Christie's top advisors were convicted of conspiracy and fraud. And even though there's never been any charges brought against Christie, you just knew that for a transition chief to have that cloud hanging over him was not very likely. That to the degree that he ever went public and had to discuss what was going on in the transition, that was not something that Donald Trump was going to want, in any way associated with his transition.
What else are you hearing about potential cabinet members in the Trump administration?
I'm not hearing anything that anybody else isn't hearing.
Come on, tell us all your secrets. You've got all these secret sources there in D.C.
Well, let me say a couple of things, and this is more from experience than any great knowledge. One of the favorite sayings, John, in the Reagan White House was that those who know aren't talking and those who talk don't know. And so, yes, we've all seen the same leaks, but those leaks often come out for a variety of reasons. Sometimes when a name is leaked, it could be the president's team wanting to, in effect, put that name out as a trial balloon to see what kind of fire it takes, to see, for instance, the vetting that goes on. Let's take Rudy Giuliani, whose name early in the week was being mentioned as Secretary of State, and we saw a bunch of critical articles about the business he had done with foreign governments. Now, Trump may think that's a big deal or not, but he probably wanted to find out about it before he makes a decision. Sometimes a leak comes out from opponents who want to put that name out so that people will fire at it. So just because a name is being leaked as a potential attorney general or secretary of state or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get the job. Oftentimes it's done for a strategic reason to either help them, to vet them, or to try to sink them.
Yep. Donald Trump tweeted out something to the effect that he is the only one who knows who is going to be in this cabinet. So I guess pay attention to his Twitter account. Chris Wallace, thank you.
You bet.
Just wanted to mention that Chris Christie is expected to speak shortly to the League of Municipalities in New Jersey. We're going to be monitoring that conversation. On Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, there will be more on the transition. He'll be sitting down with incoming White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus and the Democrats' Senate leader-elect, New York Senator Chuck Schumer. That's at 2 and 10 p.m. Eastern here on the Fox News channel. It also runs on the Big Fox Broadcast Network. Check your local listing.
I also checked Donald Trump's Twitter account. No news yet. Just
no
in case
news
you're
yet.
wondering.
Okay, so we don't know who the Secretary of whatever will be.
Well, as the president-elect works on choosing his cabinet, he's also set to meet with his first foreign leader. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will sit down with Mr. Trump this afternoon at Trump Tower. The Prime Minister says he wants to rebuild a relationship of trust, emphasizing the strong alliance between our country and Japan. Here's some numbers just to highlight our relationship. The trade between our two countries is nearly $200 billion. Japan holds more than $1 trillion of U.S. debt, and there are more than 38,000 U.S. active duty military personnel stationed right now in Japan. Connell McShane from the Fox Business Network is live at Trump Tower with more. Connell?
Hey there, Jenna. I think it is a very important day for the president-elect when he has his first face-to-face meeting with a foreign leader. But as you say, it's not just any foreign leader. It's the Prime Minister of Japan, and we know that's a big deal by the large contingent of Japanese media have joined us here in New York on Fifth Avenue outside of Trump Tower today. Now, on the issues, you're right to identify trade and military protection as big ones. I would say on trade, first of all, the Japanese officials are concerned with some of the campaign rhetoric from Donald Trump. And I'll just point you back to the final campaign rally he held right before the election in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He was talking about another subject and then pivoted by saying this: we will also immediately stop the job-killing Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Hillary Clinton called the gold standard. Now, if you paid any attention to American politics, you know that trade deal, TPP, is all but dead. Hillary Clinton had actually opposed it herself by the end. But the larger point remains: how will Mr. Trump handle trade? What will he say to the prime minister about trade today? And that other issue on the military is also very important. You talked about the number of American troops on the ground in Japan. The Pentagon has $5.5 billion in their budget for those Japanese bases, and the Japanese for the bases kick in almost $2 billion more, but Trump's been pushing for that number to go higher. So will he bring that up today? I don't know, but I spoke to Sean Spicer a few minutes ago from the transition team, and he was telling me this is, in their view, pretty much a get-to-know-you type of a meeting, as opposed to a meeting where they'll dig deep into the specifics. He said the two have spoken before on the phone and pointed out that this is a 32nd meeting that Mr. Trump has had with a foreign leader, but until today, all those have happened over the phone. This is the first one face-to-face late this afternoon, early this evening at Trump Tower. Jenna, back to you.
Watch for any headlines. Connell, thank you.
The real action to transform America is not going to take place on Capitol Hill. It's going to take place at grassroots America. It's going to take place among millions of people who are struggling economically right now, among young people, people who are concerned about the environment. I initially understand my role to be to bring those people into the political process to demand the United States Congress, the United States government, the new president represent the needs of all of the people and not just the people on top.
That's former presidential candidate Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders on his new role in the expanded Democratic leadership team. Newly elected Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says Sanders will handle outreach to key party constituencies. It's a gesture seen as a nod to the party's progressive wing. Take a look at some of the other members of the expanded leadership team. There they are on your screen. Joining us now, Brad Blakeman, former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush, and Julian Epstein, former chief counsel for the House Judiciary Committee for the Democrats and former staff director of the House Government Reform Committee. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks.
Julian, I want to start with you. Outreach to key party constituencies. Translate that for us. What does that mean?
Well, that's getting more people involved in the process, particularly millennials who were not that interested in this election for either candidate, and certainly turning out the base. If the base had turned out in 3 or 4 major cities, Hillary Clinton would have won this election. So I think that's an important part of it. I think outreach to the grassroots is only part of what the Democrats have to do. More fundamentally, what they have to do is get a central economic message. 1/3 of Americans are doing very, very well under this economy. The 1/3 of Americans that are doing well voted for Hillary Clinton by 75%. 2/3 of Americans feel very stagnant. They went for Donald Trump by about 60%. Democrats should have a message that are speaking to this 2/3 of the Americans that are not doing well. They did not in this election, and that's why they lost.
Well, Bernie Sanders tried to appeal. Well, and I guess you could say that, Brad, he had a lot of appeal to that segment of the American populace. Ultimately, he didn't win the nomination, the presidential nomination. But what should Democrats learn from his playbook that got him so far in the presidential process?
Well, Democrats put the fix in for Hillary, and they didn't listen to their own base. And I think they got caught up in the fact that of a coronation instead of listening to where their party is. So Democrats have to do some soul searching. They now need to do their own autopsy and figure out what is the Democratic Party stand for, who's going to lead them. But elections do have consequences, quoting President Obama, and now it's Donald Trump's turn to lead. And either they can help him lead in common areas of interest, or they can be obstructionists. But the American people clearly voted on Tuesday, November 8th, for change in America, and I believe Donald Trump is going to deliver that change.
Democrats... Well, Julian, Democrats...
I was going to agree
with
go ahead.
Brad,
but I'll let you ask the question. I'm sorry about that, John.
No, I just, Democrats often talk about income redistribution, and it's not fair that, you know, the rich are so rich and the middle class and the poor are getting squeezed. Is it time to change that argument?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I was going to go exactly to that point. I mean, I think the Bernie Sanders wing does represent a redistributionist kind of philosophy amongst very, very left Democrats. And that's going to be part of the discussion. But there's another part of the discussion that says, you know, the middle class workers who were making $60,000, $70,000 a year don't want to hear about redistribution. They want to hear about wages increasing, and they want to hear about economic growth at 3%, 4%. So I think Democrats are going to have a message that certainly deals with hardships of millennials who can't pay for college and people that need to have the minimum wage increase. I mean, I think that's part of the discussion. But I think more centrally, Democrats are going to have an economic message that speaks to working people. And that means, how do you increase wages? And that also means, how do you get economic growth growing at 3 or 4% a year? If we had those two things happening under the Obama administration, wages increasing more rapidly and economic growth that was more vibrant, I think Democrats would have been a shoo-in. But keep in mind also, every election since 2004, 2006, 2008, 10, 12 was the only exception, has been a change election. It's been an anti-incumbency election. And that is all rooted in the economic anxiety that middle-income people, most of the country, actually feel today.
Brad, Donald Trump obviously ran a most unusual campaign, funded a lot of it himself, didn't get a lot of support from, a lot of Republicans, at least, especially at first. So when it comes to governing, are there areas that he could actually work with Democrats? And if so, where do you see he should pick from first?
Well, I think he can work with Democrats if they're willing to come to the table and be fair dealers on the repeal and replacement of Obamacare. He's willing, Donald Trump, to include those provisions that Democrats like, that is probably likely to be included in the revamping of Obamacare, and especially trade. I think trade is another issue where Republicans can work with Democrats. But John, in this town, everybody likes a winner. And it's hard to find people who don't like Donald Trump on the Republican side right now, because they see his mandate. And you don't win places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Michigan, and other places that Democrats typically have a stronghold in, unless he's appealing to the very people that Julian has talked about. So Donald Trump will have a short honeymoon, but he has an opportunity now to really step on the gas and work with Democrats. Yeah. We're going to bring compromise back to Washington, which was heretofore a bad word.
Going to see what happens. Going to be interesting. Julian Epstein, Brad Blakeman, thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
Well, President-elect Trump promised tax and trade reform on the campaign trail. So what will that actually look like? A member of Mr. Trump's transition team joins us next to talk about his tax policies and his view of Wall Street.
This is one of those things where it's really going to depend on your particular situation and how the plan comes out. There are big differences on how big the child tax credit will get in each of these plans. There are differences on how big the standard deduction is, what happens to tax rates. Most of the benefits in terms of the size of the tax cuts are really going to people at the top end. So in Mr. Trump's plan, as he last outlined it, about half of the benefits, the half of the tax cuts go to the top 1%. In the House plan, it's even more than that, and that's greater than their share of income. So that's one thing that Republicans are really going to have to grapple with as they put all these details together, is where the benefits go.
As part of our conversation yesterday with Richard Rubin, he's the Wall Street Journal reporter covering U.S. tax policy and some of President-elect Trump's, and for that matter, congressional Republicans' new tax and economic plans of what we know so far. The Dow rallying in the 5 trading days after the election until this past Tuesday, before taking a little bit of a breather yesterday. And here's a live look at where the Dow is today. Again, things all calm right now on that front. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen testifying on the Hill today as well, saying the U.S. economy is improving, which makes a stronger case for an interest rate increase when the central bank holds its December policy meeting, its last of the year. So we'll be watching that. Joining me now, Anthony Scaramucci is a member of President-elect Trump's transition team, also founder and co-managing partner of Skybridge Capital, a familiar face to Fox Business and all of us until you were called to do other things.
I'll hopefully be back. Keep the chair warm for me, Jenna.
We'll do our best. Before we get into some of these details about tax policy, I'm just curious about you. How did you meet Donald Trump? How long have you known him?
Good. Well, so I worked at Goldman Sachs, actually, the original part of my career. And so there's a gentleman named Mike Fascitelli who ran the real estate department there. So we worked on a couple of transactions for him. And then in 2012, I got really close to him and several of his staff working on the Romney campaign. So. And I had a meeting with him early on where he said he was running for president. I didn't believe him. I was already affiliated with Governor Scott Walker at the time. And, you know, listen, I mean, he was unwavering from the day that he announced until the day that he won.
So what would you say? You know him for about 20 years or so,
yeah, 20
professionally
years.
and personally?
Probably 95, so 21 years.
You were one of those early folks that said, I'm going to bet on him to be president. You supported him. Why did you see that?
But I just want to be clear. So I was with Governor Walker and then Jeb Bush. That was primarily because of personal relationships with them. And this is what I really admire about President-elect Trump is that he recognized those loyalties and he said, okay, if they come out of the race, I expect your support. And I said that I would back him. And so sometime in March, after the South Carolina primary, we met. And then we put the campaign finance team together shortly thereafter.
So interesting. So now you're actually part of the transition team.
And it's an honor to do that.
How is that going?
Listen, I think it's going terrific. So I know there's a lot of rabble out there. It seems like people leak stories that don't know what's going on, and so maybe there's a little bit of bitterness because they're outside of the tent. But inside the tent, we're extremely well organized. He's doing a terrific job. He's got all the information that he needs to make these cabinet choices. And his biggest thing is about serving the American people and being a problem solver, a common sense problem solver for the American people.
I'm curious about the philosophy of the Trump team when it comes to the economy. Everyone's talking about names, but in order to know which names are eventually going to be picked, we have to have an understanding about what the philosophy, the perspective of the team is. So just fill us in a little bit about that. Let's talk about debt, because that's something that our viewers are really in tune with. You have $20 trillion of debt. What is the philosophy behind trying to solve that issue?
Well, listen, the number one thing we're going to need to do is grow the economy. And because if you can grow the economy, and let's just say 4% as an example, you can double the GDP in 18 years. You solve so many of the debt problems. And so what Mr. Trump intuitively understands is very, very good growth can help you defease or reduce the debt. Or as a percentage of your GDP, the debt is more manageable. And so that's the number one goal right now. Put the right tax policies together, regulatory policies to get the economy growing, and then your viewers, myself, all of us together will be less worried about the debt burden.
So you're a Wall Street guy.
I am, 28 years.
There are some that are critical of that. Elizabeth Warren is one. And she actually, she just took to Twitter a few minutes before our interview. I don't know if she knew you were coming on, but this is what she had to say, Anthony. She said, if at real Donald Trump thinks we're going to just roll over while his Wall Street buddies crash our economy again, they're in for a rude awakening. Why is Wall Street celebrating real Donald Trump? Because his administration looks like an investment banker's dream. What's your response to that?
So listen, I met then Professor Warren. I went to Harvard Law School. She got there in 93. I graduated in 89. I met her a few times through Martha Minow, the dean of the school, and I'm not going to say anything personally to attack her, but I do think that she has to spend more time with people on Wall Street. I think the whole cabal of demonization needs to end. The economy and the people of the United States are much better served if there's a harmony between Wall Street and Main Street. If you look at the periods of growth,
let me ask you this, though.
That's always been better than the demonization.
Someone might look at you and say, hey, listen, he's got a great suit on. He knows a lot about Wall Street. What is he? It is a good suit. Got a nice pen with the American flag. What does a guy like Anthony Scaramucci, what does a guy like Donald Trump really know about helping the middle class? I want you to answer that question, but I have to take a quick commercial break. Let me take the commercial break. Anthony will be back. He'll answer that question and one more, and we'll be back with more happening now. Busy day back with Anthony Scaramucci, a member of President-elect Trump's transition team, also a member, I should mention, vice chair of the inaugural committee. We'll talk a little bit about that. But I interrupted at the beginning of your answer about what do Wall Street guys that are working with Donald Trump really know about helping the middle class? What's your response?
I'm going to say three different things. But the first thing is I grew up in the middle class. You know, my dad had a lunch pail. He went to work as a laborer and an hourly wage person, but he was in the aspirational middle class. He told his kids, go to school, do your homework, and you can rise in class, which happened to me, thank God. That's the American dream. So I think I have a really good connectivity to the middle class and empathy for the situation. My friends who may or may not have grown up in the middle class do understand the policies. And so what we know is if we can promote growth and we can widen out the worker opportunity and retrain the people in the society, we can create wage growth and we can create a sustainable living standard for more Americans. I'm less focused on the minimum wage and more focused on a working wage for people. And that's a message that Mr. Trump gave behind that blue wall, Jenna, in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, Michigan.
So we'll watch for appointments that fit in again with that philosophy. I have just a final question for you. As vice chair of the inaugural committee, you know, the inauguration costs millions and millions of dollars every year. And I'm wondering if it's being considered to change the inauguration in some way that it would cost less for the American people. Is that being considered at all?
Well, remember, we're going to take private donations in. And so these will be charitable donations that are given to the inaugural committee to set this up for the presidency. And so we're giving some thought to some new ideas. I can't really give you those details yet because we're working on it. We just announced the committee names yesterday. But here's what I would say to people. Mr. Trump is a very clever, very innovative person. And my guess is that this will be a spectacular inaugural, but there'll be some fun things in there for the American people to get a message about his inclusion of them in his new administration. So I'm super excited about it.
We look forward to the details, maybe breaking details on our show next time, Anthony. Nice to have you. Thank you very much. John?
Now, this Fox News alert, the Director of National Intelligence today announcing his resignation. Director James Clapper appearing for the final time before a House committee hearing on Capitol Hill. The director telling lawmakers he is leaving at a time when our country faces the most diverse array of threats he's ever seen. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge, live from our D.C. Bureau with more. Catherine.
Well, thank you, John. Just for some context, DNI Clapper has openly discussed his plan to leave government at the end of this administration, and today he made it official on Capitol Hill. And on one of the Obama administration's most important foreign policy initiatives, the Iran nuclear deal, DNI Clapper, who oversees the entire U.S. intelligence community, said there is no evidence the deal has modified Tehran's activities.
I can't say that Iran's behavior is it has continued aggressive missile development and missile fielding.
And what appears to be the first public defense of the FBI director from the administration since he reopened and then closed the Clinton email case on the eve of the election, DNI Clapper said there's no evidence and no reason to question Director Comey's judgment, even though there are reported discussions by the Trump administration and the transition team to replace the FBI director.
I have no reason to question Director Comey. I think extremely highly of him, and so whatever actions he took, he did so in what he felt was the best, and I have no basis for questioning that.
DNI Clapper has also taken some hits on the email issue himself. He did not authorize damage assessments. These are formal assessments to determine what the national security implications were to the 2,100 classified emails that were identified on Clinton's server. And the reason that's a big deal is that it is required by law and by the regulations that govern the intelligence community, John.
Catherine Herridge keeping an eye on that beat in Washington. Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome. A little bit of a change of topic here, but an important one to families everywhere. There's alarming news about traffic fatalities. The number of deaths in the first half of this year rose by more than 10%. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, that amounts to more than 17,000 fatalities. And recent reports suggest the uptick is because of technology and because of distracted driving. That may not be all, though. We're going to talk more about this with Ken Kolash, who's spokesperson of the National Safety Council. Dr. Karen Ruskin is a licensed family therapist and psychotherapist, and Oliver McGee is an engineering professor at Texas Tech and the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Transportation for Technology Policy. It's great to have you all with good titles. Ken, let me start with you. There is an uptick of fatalities, but also gas prices are lower. There are Americans that are driving more. So is this about technology, or is it simply because there's more Americans on the road?
Traffic fatalities tend to ebb and flow with the economy. When the economy is good, more miles are being driven, and unfortunately more fatalities also occur. But the reality is we're only seeing about 3.5% increases in miles driven from year to year, while we're seeing in 2015 a 7% increase in deaths, and now in 2016 a 10% increase in deaths. So we know more is happening than just more miles being driven because of the good economy.
So Ken, would you say then that it's more than just the miles? It does have something to do with the technology?
That's what the National Safety Council fears, that the recent increase in use of apps and texting have all shown to increase the risk of crashes.
Dr. Ruskin, you say we have a hooked on phone crisis. Why is that? And how do you think that applies here?
Technology is at the heart of being a vessel in which offers us the opportunity to enter that vessel and then be distracted. And it's up to us to manage our compulsions, our addictive impulses. When we have this split attention focus, where we have technologies being before us while we're in the middle of driving, there's this impulse, this need to want to utilize that technology. We must set our own ground rules for what's acceptable and not acceptable when we are driving.
I want to ask you about how to do that, Oliver. I wonder, though, how technology can also be part of the solution, not just a distraction for drivers, but something that actually helps.
Well, when we look at the Trump transition team right now, they're going to be focusing on capital, technology, and competition, global competitiveness of America. We have to bring smart cars with smart trains and smart airplanes, because basically what we're doing and seeing in these autonomous vehicles, an airplane, a train, and an automobile, is that we're going to be on autopilot. They're all going to be driven by black boxes, and we're going to be looking at autonomous vehicles all over in the air, in the sky, and on the ground and on the rail. And we're going to be looking at black boxes in the cloud in a whole new way. I think basically when we look at Representative Bill Schuster in the House Committee of Transportation Infrastructure, and then Senator John Thune, South Dakota, on the House. On the Senate side, we're going to be looking at $1 trillion investment in transportation infrastructure, and that's over 10 years. That's the largest transportation infrastructure development that we've seen in decades. And this is going to be a brand new opportunity to bring all kinds of technology in how we transport ourselves.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. I have to take a quick commercial, because we can all state the problem, and certainly I know in our own lives we probably have experienced this distracted driving. It's really easy to do. What the solution is a bigger question. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back with all of you. Love to hear your thoughts. About distracted driving and what we can really do about it. We're seeing fatalities rise, and some are saying this is one of the reasons, because we have our phones out all the time. Ken, what do you propose to any of our viewers to solve this problem?
Well, technology got us into this problem. In part, technology can help to get us out of the problem, but it's really a responsibility for all of us. Obviously, each individual driver can make the choice not to be distracted on their phone. Simply put it in their glove compartment when they get in the car. But beyond that, the National Safety Council is leading a coalition, the Road to Zero, which is a coalition of public and private agencies that's dedicated to eliminating traffic deaths within 30 years. Part of this will be speeding the transition to autonomous vehicles.
Autonomous vehicles, it just sounds so foreign, but I guess that is the direction we're going. Dr. Ruskin, you talked about compulsion. This is something that totally resonated with me. You know, I could put my phone in my purse, but it's at a stoplight that I can't help but just double check, whether it's directions or a text message that I don't even need to look at. What about that compulsion? Yeah. How do you stop that?
That compulsion is there. It's difficult when you hear the noise or the vibration. You want to look, or even, as you said, you're at the stoplight. Maybe you don't hear a noise, but you just still want to see what's going on. It's imperative that we choose to be mindful of taking ownership of how we respond to and the kind of relationship we have with our technological devices. I help my clients to understand that we cannot control what is happening around us, meaning the changing technologies. What we can control is how we adapt, readjust, and the choices that we make.
So what do you do?
How we react.
Dr. Ruskin, I'm curious, what do you do personally? How do you handle this?
The way I work it is when I'm driving in the car, my phone is in my bag is zipped. It is absolutely a no, you cannot stick your hand in that bag while you are driving. I wait till I get to my destination, and then I get to open up the bag. You have to set up ground rules as an adult. Adults are struggling with this, and you must meet with your driving teens to come up with ground rules with them, not for them, with them, so that they can create some concrete rules that work for them.
You know, I'm all about setting up rules for my kids. It's important to make sure that I show that I can follow my own. Oliver,
role modeling and with them. Absolutely.
I mean, they're young, but they're going to be driving soon enough. Oliver, what is the solution for you? What do you think is the right thing for all of us to do?
Well, this is about smart cars and smart highways, and the Trump administration is really calling for private-public partnerships. And so I'm calling for the Silicon Valley to step in here. We can basically put blockers on these apps when the car is moving. And we can basically stop the Snapchatting and stop the texting while the car is moving. Essentially, if you are texting, it's equivalent to you had 4 beers, and so you're drunk. But if you are Snapchatting, which is a combination of texting and also tweeting and Instagramming all at the same time, that's equivalent if you had 2 pictures of beer and you are gassed, according to Andy Griffin, and you're going to be arrested by Barney Fife. Because the key issue is you cannot control a vehicle while you're Snapchatting.
Wow. I mean,
so really we need to look at a public-private partnership for Silicon Valley to speak to Detroit and say, hey, can we put some types of technologies to control these things? Remember, we're talking about black boxes on the planes, trains, and automobiles going into the cloud.
It brings up some interesting questions about Big Brother as well and how much we want that involved. But, you know, it really hits home when you say texting is like having a couple drinks. Thank you to the panel. We appreciate all of you, and we look forward to having you back. Thank you. The final 30 now, a selfie of the future on Capitol Hill with Vice President-elect Mike Pence posing with the GOP members of Congress and incoming members.
I see Paul Ryan. It's like a game of, find the congressman. It happened earlier before the vice president-elect met with the Democratic leaders in both the House and the Senate.
Guys, do we also have the other picture of the other perspective with what the picture actually looks like? I'm asking. No, they don't have it. All right. Well, it's very cute, by the way.
Looks like a bunch of members of Congress.
I wonder if the Democrats will do the same with the selfie with Mike Pence. That would be very symbolic.
Not to be outdone, they might, and we'll put it on TV if they do. Thanks for joining us.
America's News headquarters starts right now.